Today I want to work on the string layout stuff again. And so I've set up a little test here. So this is the initial string in the game. It introduces the game, and usually it looks like this, but I've replaced it with this one here because this one will challenge me to add features that are missing and stuff. But in addition to adding features, what I really need to do to get started is I need to understand the structure of what's already there. So we'll probably take some time with that, but some goals I have here is I want to be able to add a title. All right, and I actually have, if we pop over here, a to-do list, so like these things here, I want to be able to add a title here, like chapter 1 that goes up at top. So let me run this for you and show you what I mean. Right, it looks like this. I kind of want like a title that can sit at the top of the text here. I have this like commented as pages, and there's like this page is, empty still. I want to fill that in. I also want to probably have more pages here. Like I probably want a page here that's like player inventory, like have a page of just introducing them to what they're carrying, and let them go into the inventory from there on, that kind of thing. And then there's this part. Something to do is that when we look at how this renders out, let me do that. Okay, when we look at how this renders out, this is left-lined. I would like for this to be able to be centered. That would be good. I would like for it to be possible for me to mix like the justified text and centered text more freely. You can say I've got the features I do have is I can like put in arbitrary breaks. There's this issue here which we could try to fix. That one's more interesting, but probably worth figuring out sooner rather than later, which is avoid putting, let's see, I think the earliest time this happens is a little sooner. Yeah, right there it happens. First, I think. Avoid putting extra space in a spot like this. So what's happening there is that since this and this are separate nodes, it just assumes there's a space between them. And I think that that's the wrong call, but if I don't assume that, it complicates things. So we got to think about why I did that initially, how it simplified things, and how if I'm going to change the features, how this needs to be structured again. So that, hopefully I can get to the point where that period could go there with no space. But things like wrapping would still work correctly, and things like coloring and interactivity would still work correctly, otherwise. I want to be able to control the layout of that. I also want to be able to do scrolling. So this doesn't have the problem yet, but if I were to, say, put in a big dummy page 2 here, by just like repeating this a bunch, for instance, like say I wrote about that much for page 2. Well, we're starting to like, if there's a title up top, and if that looks like, for instance, I don't know, this, then, and we want to end of paragraph after that. Oh, yep, it does happen. It happened right there on the first line as well. Now, I don't have a good font. The chapter 1 font, the title font, I would probably want it to be a different font. I would also want it to be centered. Probably also want it to be bigger. So you can see when I start to fill it up, sometimes during the process of putting this stuff on the screen, I don't want to have to think about, is this too much to put on one screen, and manually do the page splits. Instead, I kind of want, or rather, I might still want to manually do the page splits, but I still want a fallback. It's like, there should be some kind of scrolling, right? so that as the layout gets bigger, you get the ability to look through it, and it's not like things can get cut off potentially, right? So I want to fix that. That seems pretty important. I want to be able to lay out separate paragraphs with different alignment rules. And then I have some other interactivity stuff I'd like to be able to do. So like if we were to put in an example of like what we'd have to maybe fill in some content to even make sense of some of the other ideas I have for upgrading the layout system with like more types of interactivity, because I've got clicking here and that does something. By the way, this page we're looking at is a dummy that I've put together for testing, so it has content that is from the second page, like the second screen here, pretty clearly copy pasted. Hope that's not too confusing, but we're just sort of throwing this stuff together for testing the text layout stuff. So yeah, I want to be able to fix these punctuation spacing problems, and then I want to have the interactivity. The clickable buttons is the only interactivity I have right now. I want to have things that work kind of like tabs in a UI, kind of like some other things that work kind of like tooltips in a UI, although they'll have their own sort of visual flavor that'll be slightly distinct from those to make it fit the theme better, and some animation and stuff to make them feel a little bit polished. I also might want to change the appearance of the button. So I have separately an issue where on my laptop the text just looks very different, and I might need to actually solve that by iterating on the laptop and figure out like if that screen is poorly calibrated or if it's this one that's poorly calibrated. But these buttons don't show up as highlighted on my laptop screen like they do here, so that is something I want to think about, like what's a better way to mark a button or an interactive piece of text as interactive than this that wouldn't become partially hidden in some cases. So there's some different ideas of stuff I'd like to do today. As for where to get started, so the spacing thing is important. I do need to get that fixed, but it's also going to be a deep change. If we start working on that, that might be the only thing we get done, and it's not really a blocker for some of the other stuff. So what is a blocker is that I don't have some of the interactivity that I need, and I think scrolling might be a piece of the interactivity I want, and the alignment options and stuff isn't as much of a blocker, but it's less likely to take all day. So if I want to chop it up into two doable things, I think we could do scrolling and then upgrade the paragraph layout stuff, and then if there's still time after that, take off a chunk like new interactivity things. That would unblock me on some of the other story engine stuff. This thing right here, the gaps between things, I guess we could maybe we're going to take an audit of the whole thing, and maybe if I look at it, I'll think of a way to do it that is not too bad. But I have a gut feeling that might be like one whole day of work to rearrange the system to allow me to avoid this. So let's start doing that audit and figure out what we can and can't do. So the way the system works right now is written in these fancy string, in this fancy string system, and so we're going to take a little bit of time to look through that. So to build a fancy string, something else we could probably spend our time on today is to work on the API for, I have these to-dos over here, so more streamlined fragment writing. So this is a fragment, that's what I call it over here, and it's currently like I have this. So we could also imagine like maybe spending some time on the API stuff. Like it could be like, I want to just do stir chapter 1 prev, for the font round 80. You could imagine this being a little nicer. Maybe I would want something like this, or something like push style, font, pop style. I don't know. That's a little bit much. We could go for like the whole scoping thing. Not usually a huge fan of that, but maybe for data spec stuff it's better. Now, one reason I'm not as much of a fan of going this hard into turning this into a data structure, like, you know, just not treating it like code, but just a C macro hack to specking out some data. The reason that makes me a little uncomfortable is I do have spots, and there might not be any in here, but if we take a look at, say, the in, you can see there are spots where I do treat this as code, where it reads into the game state and uses that to dynamically change the strings. So it is actually code, not just data right now. And by that I mean it's doing interaction like reading and writing, well, not writing, but reading off the game state and adapting its structure and behavior to what's in the game state. So if it was like that, you know, thing I was sketching out here, we'd be doing stuff like if game state, right? Whatever is greater than thingy do, right? You know, it's like it could be okay. I'm not so sure. Default font FNT round 32 def color 2 colors basic, maybe, right? Like it could look like this. We could also talk about like, do I really want to be doing this thing where I set the default on every fragment, or should that be, you know, part of the pass-through here? I don't know. So that's an option too. We could spend some time on how I build these. But let's do more on the audit here. So the way this is structured is this string acts as a container. So there's sort of this hierarchy of string nodes. Let me maybe pull up a board where I can write these. So these fancy strings. And a fancy string has children, so we can say like, what are the children of a fancy string? And that says given one fancy string, there's like a list of fancy strings underneath it. You know, and then it has like the string and the text color, the background color, the font information, the font parameters, the paragraph space, which if this is whatever this it can be any number, like it can be 0 or bigger. And then if this is true, then we're ending a paragraph on this. So the way paragraphs work right now is we have just the sequence of, you know, the children here, and any of them that say end paragraph becomes an end, you know, causes the layout to advance down to another paragraph. No wrap, which says, you know, that we can create a string, and when we create a string node, when we create one fancy string node, we mark it as no wrap. The spaces inside that aren't allowed to be wrapping points anymore, so the whole thing either wraps together down or stays up. Like it can't be, the spaces within that don't allow that to be broken up. So that's a little interesting, because that usually means that when we go to do when we go to lay it out, it gets weird. So we have this tree. It starts with like a root up top. Underneath that, we have a list of strings, right? And then what happens, right? So if we're looking at this, we have a fancy string that looks like this. And we build one by the construction API stuff. And then we do a layout. And what the layout function does is it takes one of these fancy strings and produces a different one. So it creates a separate fancy string with a root and a bunch of strings, but in this one, it does not correspond one-to-one to the one you passed in. So a string here can become two strings here, right? If this was a string with a space in it, then it can be split like this and this. If this was a string with a space in it, it could be split here and here, and then this might be one-to-one with this, for instance, right? So the layout splits things by spaces, but it doesn't merge anything. So this is where that problem with the punctuation comes from. So if I have a word here and a period here, even though there's no space in the text, it just treats that as two separate nodes here during layout, and then it's assuming spaces between the line, the nodes there. And then for no wrap, what's actually happening is you can say, like, if this was a few words with no wrap, let's say these two nodes go to this one, these two nodes here are going to this one, and then what would actually happen is that underneath the string there could be a few strings as children, right? So if this is a tree, here's a root, here are the children of that root, here are the children of that node there. And so this is how we structure it when there's a no wrap. So these spaces here do get laid out as spaces, but they don't trigger the opportunity to wrap. So it has to decide to wrap either here or here, but not here or here, right? So that's the way that's all structured so far. And we have to be careful because while it's a tree structure, it's not an arbitrary tree. I can't take a portion of this tree, like I can't take this root and just stick it inside another tree and expect it to work. The layers kind of matter. Like the root gathers things up. This string here, these strings here are the things that go to the screen, except in the case of no wraps where there's another layer split. And that structuring was kind of just arbitrary on purpose. Like, it wasn't a mistake. It was what was easy to make this work when we were first trying to figure out how to do the no wrap. And so that's fine-ish, but we might want to actually just say that, like, hey, the tree concept makes more sense and is generalized, and you can put things inside of things. So the way we end a paragraph, say that this is the end of a paragraph. There's some line here of text, and then it's the end of a paragraph, and so this is the beginning of another paragraph. Right now, that just gets marked here. When we spread that out, we put this string here, and then we put in a dummy node that ends the paragraph, and so these become like here's some text that's laid out. Here's a end of paragraph that was separated out during this pass to make layout easier, and then here's a paragraph maybe like right here or something, or maybe here's a paragraph and there's the end of the paragraph, or who knows, right? But it might be more convenient if paragraphs were hierarchical, right? So if we had root and then paragraph and then some strings inside that paragraph, and then a paragraph again and some strings inside that paragraph. But what might be convenient about a structure like that is that it could let us do like adjusting the layout rules independently. So you know what, that's kind of an interesting one. I think that the issue of, like, how do I center align chapter 1 while not center aligning any of this, and then center align this again, that is pretty interesting. And let me show you why. So this is just some text here. If we go over to the core game file that drives all this, here's our tick and draw function. So this is what's happening every frame. When I do this, the tick and draw function is the thing that happens every frame to make this show up, and then it's calling into the fancy string stuff and into this particular fragment to get the content that it's going to display. But the way the tick and draw function is organized here, it creates a root. It creates one of these roots, so it's just this fancy string with no parent. It's a root, and then it looks to see, it's got a little bit of a dynamic dispatch, like, do we have some content at the top of the story machine stack? And if we do, here's where we call that. So we grab the story procedure, which is the code name for the fragment, and we pass in the fancy system, which is the system that kind of orchestrates the interactivity and the construction of these fancy strings. And then we pass in the root of the string, and we fill that up with text like this. And yeah, you can see we actually set the default here, so the fact that we set it here is like redundant. Anyway, the next step is once we've filled this up with the content from here, so this is like an output parameter, it's gathering up all of this. What happens next is we have it all gathered into a main string, we put it through layout, and at layout we determine things like if we're going to do justify. If we look at the layout parameters here, that's where we have the width of how much space there is, so we just determine that it's going to be 1200 and put it through the app size scaling thing. So it's 1200 on my monitor. On a smaller monitor, it adjusts based on the ratio of the width of my monitor versus the width of the monitor that it's actually running on. So it's always like the same percentage of the screen is what I should say. And I specify it in terms of pixels on a 1920 by 1080 standard definition monitor. So that's what the 12,000 means. So there's the width, and there's also the alignment. So that's defaults to 0, but like if we turned off justify and looked at it, then you can see we get the paragraphs don't have a clean right edge anymore, which might be something you want sometimes. But then you can also do things like say, okay, I want the alignment to be the align factor to be 0.5, and then that leads to everything is centered, right? And that's cool. I don't want everything to always be centered, but having this and this centered is what I want. And so you can see where we have a sort of structural issue here, where the decision about what to do with alignment and justification and the width is all happening here in these layout parameters. And so there's only, when you build a big, long, fancy string, there's only one layout parameter for the block. There's only one layout parameter block for the whole fancy string. And so in the current system, in order to get this and this centered while the rest is like justified text, I would have to split this up into lots of separate little fancy strings, and that would make it a lot harder to like create these content procedures that I do that like spit out story stuff in one spot, right? If I want one spot that can spit out all the story stuff, it isn't quite going to work that way. So why don't we start there? I think that that's going to give me a good sort of chance to span across the entire design of the thing and make some tweaks and changes and get my hands dirty without it being a particularly hard problem. So the first thing that's going to have to happen is that we need some kind of layering now. We need some kind of idea inside the structure, like I was saying with these paragraphs, where maybe these paragraphs can carry the layout parameters. So each paragraph has unique layout parameters and is a chain of nodes has a chain of nodes underneath it that undergo further layout, right? I think that might be the way to build it, because then these things here, these layout parameters can go and live inside the node, and they'll be applied at the granularity of paragraphs. Now, the hard part about that is that right now the way I structure paragraphs is quite different. Right now, a paragraph is a divider. It's a mark on one of the nodes. So like if this node here is marked as the end of a paragraph. Sorry. If this node here is marked as the end of a paragraph, so we have a paragraph here and then a paragraph here, it translates into a chain of like this node, an end of paragraph node, this node, and an end of paragraph node, right? So it becomes more like delimiters rather than containers. And I want to switch to this container mode where we have a paragraph container for this and a paragraph container for this. So I think that must be my first step. It's just that transformation of how we do end paragraph. Whoops, I'm on the wrong files. So looking at the design of the fancy string, right now it's attached as a node. Let's leave that. I think something I want to start doing is putting kinds on these nodes, because if I start going through these in debuggers and like looking at my hierarchies, I'm going to start getting lost at like what kind of node, string node I'm looking at. So this fancy string nodes are going to have this kind on them. We'll have a root kind for the root of the tree, a paragraph kind. We'll have a text kind, and we'll have a layout kind. And hopefully that's a good guess. So for now, let's try to just start using that. One little change at a time. This might be silly and unhelpful, I'm not quite sure, but I don't want to get stuck like trying to plan out every detail and not making some changes, and this change could be super wrong and it still gets me started on making some kind of changes that gets me more familiar with the system again. So I'm happy to start here. So when we make a new string, if there's no parent, okay, so if there is a parent, then we'll say the new string kind should be text for now. And if there is no parent, then this is a root. Right, we'll do it like that, maybe to get started. That should make no difference to how this runs, because it's just a new field. Okay. Now when do we do attach, where we attach something after the fact? Right. Interesting. So here what's happening is I'm creating a layout fancy string, and then I'm attaching it into a list of fancy strings, which is just another fancy string, in order to have that list be the like collection of all the separate things. So it's possible, and this is useful later on, to have like, here's the main text here, and then there's like a character sheet or something off to the side that's like a mini version of a character sheet. Maybe you want that to be something you can expand and get a detailed interactive character sheet, and then hide the story like over here. And then the point is, either way, you have this thing where you have two completely independent layouts where you do a layout and they don't interact with each other. Like you do one layout here and one layout here, and you don't know where the positions of those are, or like what their widths and heights are. They're completely independently placed on the screen after they are arranged. What we're doing here is different. We still want the heights of each paragraph to contribute to the total layout. So we don't want to have to manually create a separate bit of text and then manually do the layout for things like the chapter title that is separate from the rest of it. We kind of want them all to lay out together in my vision of this right now. So that is interesting and difficult as well. I'm thinking that as I'm looking at all this, I'm thinking that small, careful changes isn't the way to go, because there's too many hacks. And I have one or two options when there are too many hacks. I can lose features and unroll the hacks, and then add in features again from a different direction. And the advantage to that is you can stick to small baby step changes. But the other approach is to say, don't worry about small baby step changes, pick a design, build it in, kind of just do violence to what was there and trample it as you build the new thing. I think that might be what we need to do today. So I'm thinking the way this whole thing works is going to start changing. We're not going to just have every node be the same, and we're not going to attach them in as if there is no special meaning at different parts of the hierarchy. There is, and we're going to start encoding that explicitly. So I'm thinking like you declare roots for strings, you declare paragraphs, and you declare paragraphs by attaching them onto a root. You declare text by attaching it onto a paragraph. And we'll start there, because this is just part of the construction. How we're going to rebuild the part that does layout, I'm not quite sure yet, but we want that much. And so the root just gets marked as a root and we move on. A paragraph expects to be attached to a root. Again, actually tracking these kinds might not actually serve any particular feature. It might be that this is something I'm doing more as like a conceptual aid. I can inspect the nodes in the debugger and make sure that they're correct and stuff, but it might not actually be that I need to remember this data to make it work. I'm not quite sure. I kind of get the impression that there might be reasons why it doesn't do much to track it. So we're copying properties from the root into, yeah, what is the copy properties? Let's take a look at that. I kind of remember it, but I want to look at what it's copying again. Right, so it's copying properties from the root into the string below it. That's nice. Yeah, I think we want to keep that idea and probably expand on it. So the root will have ideas like what is the default way to align text. So if you want most of your text to be justified, but the title is the only thing that's going to be special, then the root would just have the paragraph rules, the font, the default font, the default color, the default font, the default color, the default layout rules, and all of them just get kind of passed down, and then you specially override them in certain little places, right? I think that that's still fine. So fancy copy properties can just go down. Some properties will not apply below the level of paragraph, like paragraph layout stuff won't make any sense to specify on text nodes, but it'll just be ignored, so it won't hurt anything either. So this is a text node, paragraph. So we copy the paragraph properties down to the new string and mark it as a text node. Okay. So I think that replaces the need for that and gives us the new structure idea there. So we no longer need to mark things as end of paragraph. So let's just take that out. That'll bust a bunch of stuff, which we will then need to go and track down. But we do need to replace one thing, which is it had a way of saying how much space there was after a paragraph. So I think that'll be a new piece of information when we start laying things out. So for now, let's just make that the only thing we keep as how are we going to mark it? Paragraph space, maybe. Paragraph space takes in this, which is a paragraph. Isn't going to have that feature anymore. Paragraph. And paragraph space will look like that. And this is going to be like assert that this is actually a paragraph. Again, more for debug purposes, catching all the places where I might accidentally try to attach paragraph space to the wrong node because I'm altering the structure of how I specify these fancy strings. So I'm likely to have mistakes in the transition process that I want to catch. And over here on the fancy string data structure, we're going to take out the end paragraph. We still want the paragraph space. That's going to actually survive this entire transformation. That's good. Okay, other things we can do when we fancy layout. Yeah, but what about the alives? Where do I create an alive? There it is. So the new rule here will be alives get attached to text nodes, and they can get attached to layout nodes, but they can't be attached to a paragraph or to a root. So we maybe want to be able to catch that possible mistake. All right. Okay, so this one here is right, so this is just gonna become like that, right? So that should do it. Question, what is alive? Alive is, it's the name for, so these fancy strings have all this layout stuff, and the alives that I attach to them are for sort of quote unquote bringing the text to life, making it alive. So that's like interactive stuff, this stuff that makes it animate, stuff that interacts with the clicking or the hovering of the mouse, stuff like that. Word container. So what is this about? This is a part of how the layout system works. So yeah, so we want to change some of these. So this is let's see, we have the text kind, we also have the layout kind. So when I say that I have a layout kind, I still think of the root of the layout as a root. Root just sort of means it's a list of other fancy strings with no special properties besides the it contains all of the defaults that get passed down automatically and stuff like that. So we get a root called layout. And then here we want a layout node, which we attach to the layout root. We can't call it fancy layout because that's the name of this, so this will be fancy node layout node as a part of the transition plan. To do later, I want to reconsider the naming, but I'm just kind of trying to break things up and get started with some of the changes that I envision. So throwing in random names for a cleanup pass later. Layout node, word container, and then we copy properties, this time from the original string in the text. So this is a text node, and we're copying its properties onto the layout node. Okay. And so the only difference between this should just be assert. Actually, same thing with you. Okay, now taking a copy of that, that's how we make a layout node. Right, so in this layout loop, we have our first problem, which is here, we are scanning and treating each node here as a piece of text when it's actually a paragraph. So, yeah, what we want to do is for FNC string OG paragraph, first child, OG paragraph does not equal 0, OG paragraph equals OG paragraph next. And for each of those, we're going to create a new paragraph. FNC paragraph by copying or by putting it onto the layout, and then we want to I think that's fine. I think that's all we need. No, that's not true. We want to do the fancy copy properties because we want to get the correct layout properties. So the paragraphs are going to contain things like justification and wrapping width, and we want to save that. So there we get our new paragraph, and then inside the new paragraph, we want to put copies of the split up string. So that's OG paragraph, right? This is like we take this whole loop now and stick it inside here. So OG string doesn't start at the beginning like that. OG string actually comes from, right, so this right here is a root. Let me rename that to a root. Root, this is OG paragraph now. We look at its strings, OG string. If it's got a font, we grab the relevant font, we grab some info, we do the split. So this right here, well, no, that's not quite specific enough. I was going to say that's where we need to solve the problem of inserting extra spaces, but that's actually not true. The problem of inserting extra spaces is going to require like a deeper rethink. Okay, so I think this means paragraph now. We look at the original string, and if it's a no wrap string, we probably want to change how this is being constructed soon, but fine for now. Then we change the word container pointer to be this layout node. And we copy properties onto the word container. Okay. Then we iterate the words inside the original string. Each of those gets a new one of these. These are layout nodes that go into the word container. Okay, so the layout node can't say that it has to have a paragraph as a parent. It can also have another layout node as a parent right now. And that's because of how we are structuring. You know, really I don't need this part as much, because this is used inside of an internal algorithm. It's not used as part of content specification, so I'm not trying to catch errors here quite the same way. I am trying to catch errors here still, but I'm going to have bugs here to debug that I'll have to get right to get the whole thing working, whereas I can have like little corners inside the content that will escape my notice for, you know, because there's a sort of the amount of content scales, whereas the algorithm is a isolated, localized piece of information. So I'm happy to just say you can create layout nodes without me double checking on the asserts, because it looks like those probably want to be more flexible. Okay, so we look at the size of the text that was in this node. We make a bunch of layout nodes for each independent word that we split out, and we add up the total width and the total height, or like the necessary Y range. And then if this was a no wrap, then the word container is itself a layout node, which needs to contain the total width that we calculated and the total, like the necessary Y range. Let's see. So that's all good. Okay, so here we're checking if this is the end of a paragraph and introducing an extra node. That idea is out. We're saying now that paragraphs are hierarchically structured, not delimited. So we don't even have an end of paragraph idea, and we don't need to generate end of paragraph splitters like that anymore, because we are emitting paragraph hierarchy right into the layout version of the string. Right, here we go. So now it gets a little bit crunchy. We're about to get into the heart of the layout. So up here is a data transform. It's a simple, in comes a fancy string, out goes another fancy string, which is close to being a copy, except that some of the text nodes right here are now split by white space, right? So we've split up the white space that was previously buried inside of some of the text nodes and turned them into layout nodes, which don't contain any white space. So we, have maybe some smaller granularity nodes there, which lets us, do the thing where we adjust the size of our spaces and lay out the words and know how to, we can wrap the words and stuff like that now. Okay, so here in the heart of the layout, we're actually doing keep track of a position, pick where things go, decide when to wrap. It's a little bit more brittle, maybe a little bit more touchy. It does a harder kind of work, which is that it has to reason about geometry of the layout of things, and so we want to be careful as we go through this. So what's happening? It's trying to determine if this is an end of paragraph and do something special there. So the logic of this, let's read the logic out loud to ourselves a little bit and kind of get enough feel for what it is and maybe come up with an idea of how to transform this to deal with paragraphs as chunks. So it's looking at the chain of words, and as it's looking at each node in that chain of words to print out, sometimes it finds one that is marked as an end of paragraph. And so if it finds an end of paragraph and it's not already at the start of a line, it's going to mark this as so line start equals 0 means it hasn't actually started a line yet, and so you're ending a paragraph where there's no content in the paragraph and it gets ignored. But, well, hold on, that's not true. If this is the start of a line and this is not the end of a paragraph, so it does not ignore the end of paragraph, but rather, in order for it to start the line, it makes sure that the thing it's starting on isn't already the end of a paragraph. And so it's like, okay, if we haven't started a line yet, and we have a string node that isn't an end of paragraph, then we'll start the line. So here we're starting a line. And then we do, this just looks at the dimensions on the layout to save it for use later. And you can see it like has a safety null check there, because we're iterating up to and including string being null. So it's a linked list. And the linked list ends when the next pointer points to null, and usually you stop and don't go there, but in this algorithm I am going there because I use that as a sort of spot to hit, to land on, to finish flushing out, because you don't emit stuff every step of the way here. We're emitting stuff when it reaches like the point where we have to emit it, because if we emit stuff too early, we might end up emitting something that we end up later deciding we want to actually wrap it, and that gets messy. So instead of emitting it early, or emitting it right away, we build up a bunch of stuff we want to emit eventually, and then we flush it all out at once. And so letting that null flow through the system is sort of to force the final flush of the last line of text. So here, again, we're checking if this is not an end of paragraph. So one way we could look at this and do this, I'm thinking, now that so we got that, and if this is an end of paragraph. I think what we could do is say all of this can be kept. We'll remove references to end of paragraph. Anything that says, we'll assume that end of paragraph is always false. So we'll bake it in as if this is always false, because these will be words. They won't represent ends of paragraph. And so this will be eliminated, and it's just if the string is not 0. This will be eliminated. It'll just be if the string is not 0. This will be eliminated. It'll just be if the string is not 0. This will be eliminated, and that's because it's a member of an OR chain instead of an AND chain, but also it's the positive instead of negative. So those two changes together mean that we think about it the sort of equal but opposite way, which is, since this is always false, it does not contribute to an OR clause, just as when it's always false, having it in an AND chain doesn't contribute anything. So we just take that out, and we still just say it's the end of a line if we've reached an empty, well, maybe not even that. No, we still want this. So it's the end of a line if we've reached this case or this case, but we don't check for end of paragraph anymore. So end of line then tells it to flush out everything it's got. And right now it's telling it to advance by line height. And then here we have this gets eliminated. So this is always false, doesn't happen. And what would happen instead is paragraph space will happen outside of the loop, because this loop will be a loop of words. So we're actually like inside of a paragraph looking at that paragraph's words. And none of those words can be the end of a paragraph anymore, because the end of the paragraph is in the container outside of the loop. Okay, so that's my plan. Let's try to go for it. So we need a paragraph loop, which starts at the beginning of the layout. And this one can just be like a normal old loop, linked list loop, where we stop. We don't need to flush the whole thing there. But then we want it to contain basically all of this. So let's grab that and stick it all inside there for now. So end of paragraph stuff will go there. And this will read off of the paragraph now. And these will just say, assume end of paragraph is always false, and bake that into the logic where it used to be a variable. And this, it's always false, so that comes out, but it comes and lives over here. So it's always the end of a paragraph when we get to the end of a paragraph node. And so we use the paragraph space to advance the Y at that point. And we always find a null at the end of a chain of nodes inside of a paragraph, so we always flush out the last line of the paragraph and advance y to the end of the line there. So that all happens. The min and max on y gets updated every time something gets emitted here. I think this pretty much works. Okay, so now we're no longer seeing errors inside of the fancy string system. Now we're seeing errors inside of the core game loop. Just code. So all right. So this attach thing is interesting. We get back a root. So something interesting that happens is when we run layout, the layout function takes in a string and returns a new one. So it actually allocates its own and returns it. And the new one is like its own root, right? But then we actually want to chain them together like this. So maybe we want to pass in the root instead of having it passed out to us, because then we could have it get collected into any kind of node. Or maybe we still want this attach idea. Maybe we just want to keep attach. So let's go and say attach is an idea like this. And what attaches do can only be done on a situation where we have parent is not equal 0 and parent kind equals QU fancy string kind root. And same rule on the string, they actually both have to be roots. And so we have this arbitrary tree of root kind nodes. So they're not all roots in the purest sense, because we can have a tree of these roots. But the leaves of the tree of roots are the actual roots to fancy string. So like if I have a root and some fancy string hanging off of it, that's fine. And then sometimes I make a root and have it contain a chain of fancy strings where each of those roots within it is a fancy string. So then it becomes sort of like the roots just are a dynamically linked list of fancy strings, and each root contains within it the full tree of a fancy string, like with its layout and its features and stuff. And that is where the structure is enforced, but the roots are like loosely forming the top end of the tree. Okay, so that's all good, but now we have a bunch of spots where the way we specified paragraphs doesn't work anymore. So in order to get more useful errors from the compiler, I'm going to try to do like something like this. There we go. Now it'll jump me to the errors rather than forcing me to find them myself. So I'm gonna have to start doing something like at the beginning here, I set aside a paragraph sort of variable to reuse. We're getting a root from up here. I'm gonna just shorten this to par. and then these can go away. I want the default style to now include the paragraph space. So whenever we create a paragraph, we can set its paragraph space. And so when I create a root, I can set its paragraph space. And that paragraph space acts as the default. And I want to make sure that the fancy like copy properties is now going to pass through the paragraph space. So I think that, yeah, that was not a part of the rules before. Okay. So back to this. Whenever I create a string now, it's going to be wrong because it's going to want to go on the string, and those are all going to be called roots and paragraphs. And then, yeah, we have here where we want to do a paragraph. Now, there's some stuff we could do here to make this easier to specify these. Like right now I'm having to do a lot of reworking of what names get saved and passed through as handles everywhere. And instead I could have the fancy system keeping track of like, oh, what's the currently selected paragraph, right? We can just say like, oh, when you're building a string, when you create a paragraph, the fancy system remembers the paragraph. And so things like fancy string f and fancy, you know, we don't need end paragraph here, but we need like the no wrap and the alive. They keep track of where your last paragraph is and where your last text is. So then these could just look like this, right? I think that's good because that'll allow, if there are continue to be like little shifts in the data structure, I don't want to have to continue to rewrite all the code. And we can probably count on that API to generalize to a lot of the different data structures we might care about. Certainly better than the way I'm doing it now. And I'm going to end up having to change everything for this. Like, the change I'm currently making does not make it simpler to do the refactoring that needs to be done by any means. It makes it harder, for sure, but I think it will be better to have it this way in the long run. So as long as I'm gonna be doing a big refactor like the one I'm about to do, I might as well do one that will stick a little better. So something like this. And this works for everything except the defaults. So we're going to have to do that separately. Yeah, but let's see. So the fancy system is going to start keeping track of these like construction helper pointers. So we have a fancy string last paragraph and last text, right? And when we do a paragraph node, we're going to remember the last paragraph. And when we do a text node, we're going to remember the last text. And when we do a paragraph, we're actually going to set last text as well. Because we don't want to have, like, we start a paragraph and then we do some style change and then interpret that as a change to the last word or last text of the previous paragraph. We want to interpret that as a change to the default of the current paragraph. And similarly, when we create a root, we'll set both of them so that way, when we do things that set the last paragraph properties or the last text properties, they're actually just changing the default properties on the root itself. All right. That way we don't have that problem I was worried about how we're going to set defaults. It should just work. And then when we make text, we will actually be grabbing that from the last paragraph. Here, same deal. Okay, so these become like we have to use the system instead of the string, and then to get to the string, we go to the system's last text, right? So the strings come from the last text now, and then we pass the systems through instead of the strings. And this one is similar, except we're not getting the last paragraph or the last text, we're getting the last paragraph. And so we don't want that rule because we want to be able to apply this to roots. And we're going to just do it like that from now on. Okay, so we go, great, now we don't need a local paragraph. We just say paragraph. We just say paragraph, and then the text we emit is in that paragraph from then on. Fancy alive still says it wants to take the string. We don't want that. So fancy alive will be much like what we did before. We'll grab the string from the last text. Great. So now these just become like this. This we learned can go away. This just becomes like this. Although we need to think about paragraphs. None of this is written with the correct paragraph structure. So there's a paragraph, and then boom, 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 boom affects this text here, and that goes away. Here's a paragraph. Here's a paragraph. Oh, right, and the no wraps want to get changed. Oh, paragraphs do want to know about their root. Okay. I can live with that, I guess. Can I? Is it a little bit silly? The reason it's not the worst thing ever is that no. I can make this even better. I'm gonna just go for it. So paragraphs don't need the root specified. Instead, they'll get their root. Oh, I don't have a last root. The root is explicit because, okay, so I either need a last root level of the construction helper. So then what would be cool is then you wouldn't need to pass this through at all, right? These would just become things that pass the system itself through and construct on it. Which is not bad. I feel like that's not bad. And then the other trick I have to do is when I'm doing layouts, I can no longer use the paragraph type, I would just do everything as a layout node, which would be fine. It's a big change. I feel like we have enough changes like lined up already, so maybe I'll do that as a separate pass. There's a certain times when it's like beneficial to load up a few refactors into one big pass, but then you can go too far with that and get too many things in the mix at once and get lost in the sauce a little bit. And then knowing your limit is how you deal with that. And I feel like I'm at my limit of how many different reorganizations I want to manage simultaneously. Okay. All right, so this and this can both get replaced with, we just begin a paragraph right here. No, wait, they're both conditionals. They're not opposites, so you want to be careful. Let's put that way. All right, so you get a root into the paragraph thing there, and then you're like that. You're like that. Okay. You take the root. Okay. Begin a paragraph. System. There we go. System. So this is the beginning of a paragraph with a different paragraph space. So that should only affect this paragraph's spacing. We can put that at the end if we like. Another paragraph with a paragraph space of 10 instead of 30. Set the color and the font. So this is a paragraph with the standard spacing, paragraph, standard spacing, paragraph, standard spacing, paragraph with standard spacing, paragraph with standard spacing, paragraph with standard spacing, paragraph with standard spacing. Okay, but I did skip over these things. Let me go back and fix those. Just passing in the system now. All right, give me a clean to-do list compiler. There we go. Paragraph with standard spacing. Just pass the system in for these now. Paragraph with standard spacing. Just pass the system in for things like these now. Paragraph with standard spacing. Just pass in the system. There we go. All right, progress. Okay. Yeah, we gotta put a paragraph. This paragraph can go here. Oh, here I didn't actually mark up end of paragraph, which is probably fine, but I think it's better to have it in case this ends up chaining on something else, or if I like write more underneath it someday. So paragraph, string, no wrap. So these just take the system. Just the system. All right, so you're the root. Paragraph, standard spacing, just the system. Paragraph with standard spacing. For all of you, it's just the system now. And these things which are doing the strings last child, instead it's just the system. go. There we go. This one here should be a paragraph, even though it's not marked as one. This here is a paragraph with a spacing of 0. And these should just be taking in the system. Paragraph again with a spacing of 0. And then these just take in the system. Paragraph with standard spacing. These just taking the system. Paragraph with standard spacing, and these just taking the system. Paragraph, standard spacing, paragraph, standard spacing, paragraph, standard spacing. Let's see, all of you don't need that. The string last child 1 just as the system, and the sys string last child is just the system. There we go, another file done. Okay, how are we doing? Paragraph here, just a string here, or just a system here. Paragraph here, paragraph here, paragraph here, with the system as the only parameters there. Paragraph here, system, root instead of stir there. And another file done. We are getting pretty far here. You're out. All right, another one. Paragraph there, paragraph there, paragraph there. Paragraph there and there. This is one of those spots where I need scrolling. Because it's such a long text, like wall of text with all those separate dialogue lines. There's another one. Here we want a paragraph with a paragraph spacing of 0. And these just referred like that. Here we can do another one of those. Wait, these are different. 36, paragraph root. Okay. And paragraphs, fine, don't need that. And we're close to done. Now I'm back to the game loop function again. And it just needs me to pass it the system instead of the string to set the defaults. Oh, it's called fancy system at this level. String F. Ooh, excuse me. All right, so we've got, this should be called a root now. Put a paragraph there. Put a paragraph there. Drop that. Put a paragraph there. Drop that. Paragraph there. Drop those. Hey, there we go. And we're back with just one big issue. The font change isn't here, and the chapter up here is missing, and some of the text here is getting cut off. So let's go and see if we can make sense of why that might have happened. This is in the intro string. Is there any sign here that I could transformed it the wrong way? No, not really. It looks like the color is working. So it's not something like that, it's the font. And if I look at how this is implemented, I'm gonna guess that I'll see no significant difference between this and the way the color's happening. So that suggests to me that it's somewhere here in the font ID stuff. Yeah. So this is where I was saying I do want to switch this to making a layout node that takes in the layout. So the new paragraph looks like that. Okay. Copying the OG string properties onto the new string, so we should know about the font ID. Also, do you notice this doesn't seem centered? Like all the text should be centered, but this is, and it's like it's compared to this, it's clearly not centered. I kind of think maybe it's just the rendering. Maybe it's laying out with the correct font, but then rendering with the wrong font. Ah, yeah, you know what? This would do it. I forgot to introduce the change in structure here. So these are the paragraph level layout nodes. And then all of this happens on each paragraph. So exactly what's happening is we look at each paragraph and go through each of its pieces of text. On each of those, we grab out the font. We render this, and if there's a string on it, we render it. And if there's a string on it, if it has subchildren, we render those. So this could get closer to a generic tree walk for the layout rendering, I think. Right, like once we've built a layout, maybe we can just walk the tree, and we don't need to know about like, oh, paragraph level, string level, substring level for the substrings on the node wraps, right? We might not need to be doing that anymore. We could just say like, here's a box. You know, if it's got some background color, show that. If it's got some text, show that. If it's got some children, then walk those two and just like put it all on the screen, right? let's see. Yep, okay. So these are still busted. You could visit a tavern. Now, why does it go you could and then rap and visit a tavern over here on the left? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Right? Like, what is that? Made a paragraph. These both went into the same paragraph. This one got marked as no rap. This one had an alive attached. It's probably an issue during the layout. Probably gonna have to walk through the layout with a case like that. Why don't we do it that way? Let's isolate that one problem and study it up close. There we go. See that? That's pretty clear. So what's different? What is it doing? Let me eliminate one source of variability here, which is I wasn't previously running any of this on centered. Okay. So here we go, left aligned. It looks like that. Why? These are just directly on the substring. The paragraph, we look at the string. String P, sub P. None of that seems like it should be different. So it's a layout problem, and I can't see an obvious thing instantaneously. So let's go to debug mode. Now I'm going to walk through the layout function today. So we get this root. Let's take a look at what our root looks like for a few minutes. So it's got one child, and that child's a paragraph. It has two children. The first is some text that is not marked as no wrap, and the next one, some text that is marked as no wrap. Visit a tavern. You could. Okay. So that all makes sense. We go into our original paragraph, grab an original string, grab the font, and we split it up into words. So we got two words, visit, and they're going out into the word container. That's just the layout node called paragraph, presumably. Yep, so it's got one child. Boom. Now paragraph has two children. And there, so we've got all the words. This is not marked as no wrap. And scratch. What was scratch for? Scratch was for splitting the words. Got it. And then we go again. This time we make a separate layout node for the to act as the word container. And then the word container gets 1. So the paragraph itself that we're building contains 3 children, the first 2 words and then the word container for this one. But when we do this, it won't go up any further because the new words are going into the word container. And then since this is a no wrap, the word container gets the total width, the min y0, and the max y0. Okay, so the word container, it's got a live ID, font ID, rectangle coordinates. Okay. That's all the OG strings. And we pop in here. It's the start of a line. Word count equals 1. Line width, y0, y1. Line word count goes up by 1. Here we go again, we get the word's width, y0 and y1. It's got 1 word. It's got 1 space before it. No need to end the line because we're not overrunning our bounds yet. And we're good. Now, here we're on the word container. That all makes sense. So the number of words becomes 3 for this step. And then the number of spaces should be 3. So it looks like that. It's not far enough along to end the line. And so it updates these things again. Word count has become 5. We go forward. Now we should be on a null. We are. And so this counts as the end of a line because, yes, okay. So then it comes in here. It's like, are we justifying? Yeah, okay. Line word count is greater than 1, so the amount of solid text we have has a width of 322. The amount of leftover space we have makes a space, our spaces would be 219 pixels. That's over the threshold, so we use the smaller amount of space. Calculate our line's height. Then we saved this earlier, the line start, and we're going to iterate over that. And place the rectangle. For any children, we deal with them, but there aren't, so we skip it. Okay, so the first two are working out just fine. Here's where it gets interesting. So here, the space count is going to come out as 2. So we add a little bit to the rectangle's width for the extra spaces that are in the word. Now that we know the actual space width. And we place the rectangle for this word, so that goes there. Right. Okay. Then we look at these ones here. So sub x begins with the value of x. These have widths and stuff. So we add in the 158 there, the 0 there, y1. The sub x becomes this plus the width of a space. That makes sense. So when this is done, it should have gone 3 times, and we get these rectangles here which look fine. They have the same y properties as their container, and the last one has 362 as its right hand side, which matches the right hand side of its container. Yeah, so all that adds up. And finally we end up with 362 plus a little bit more space as the new x position. Okay. For Mentor A8, could RenderDoc help point to where the issue may be, why it's rendering off like that? I don't think so. A RenderDoc would be helpful if this was an issue with anything that so RenderDoc sees what happens basically at the level of what OpenGL calls you make, and everything onwards from there. So like how it gets processed through the OpenGL pipeline. And I haven't touched anything this morning that changes that half. So there's like the portion of my code that lays things out, gives them positions and stuff on the CPU, and then the handoff to the GPU side. And RenderDoc can see all this, but all the changes I've made were over here. So what I would see in RenderDoc is the data that says, hey, you put some text up here on the top of the screen instead of in line with the rest of it. And I'd be like, okay, great. I knew that was the problem. But I don't think that we're going to look at that and find that like, oh, there's this transform happening in the shader that I didn't remember, because that would just be the probability that that's where I would find the issue seems very low, given that all the changes are on this side of that CPU GPU divide, not on this side, right? I mean, surprising things can happen, but I have not spent enough time debugging to look in the super unlikely places like that my renderer is doing something unexpected. I think it's just the layout engine. So those are good. So I think the layout maybe is fine. So let's go to the part right here where I'm sending these to the renderer backend. This part is actually missing when it shouldn't be, but right now the background, yeah, it's just transparent. And we have a string. This goes where it should go. This is empty. This is empty. This has some string. This is empty. Okay, this is the one where there should, first of all, let's look at this. There should be yeah, so that rectangle looks fine. Like if I look at the paragraph above it, it goes from okay, I probably want to be able to do that better. But if I look at the paragraph and I go, okay, 3 children. The first child is at 779. Oh wait, no. The first child, this is confusing because I can't see the boundary. 779 to 836. The next child's at 846 to 927. And the next child is at 937 to 1141. So that's the right range there. 518 to 562. That's the right range there. So the box should show up, and yet look at that. Even that is missing. The one we're looking at has an alive ID of 1, but it has no background color. Oh, maybe that's the issue. I think maybe I know where this is coming from. But let's take a look here. So the box would go in the right spot if it had a color, which it's supposed to, but it doesn't. The string here should be empty because it's a word container. And then inside, if you look at these substrings, yeah, the substrings are not offset like they should be. So what happened there? They were right and they were right and they were right all the way through the layout, and then, or all the way through the layout here, and then in the render they're not aligned anymore. And that's because I haven't updated layout shift position. So the change in structure is causing everything to break because there's all these hard-coded rules about how deep into the tree you go to apply certain rules. What I kind of would like is if I could end up in a spot where I have a more generalized rule that says no matter where you are in the tree, here's how we update it, and here's a plan for how that makes it do the right thing, so that if you take this subtree and you put it deeper or higher up in the tree, it still has the same basic shape within itself. Haven't got that kind of property right now. But here we go. Set up another loop here, go over the paragraphs. On each paragraph, we go over the strings, and then that should work. Okay, the box still isn't showing up. I have a guess about why that is. Yep. Same thing again. And same thing again. Anywhere where I have it looping over the layout, it is assuming it knows how deep in the various properties are, and so this refactoring involves changing those assumptions. And anywhere that I fail to update the loop over the layout is going to have the problem. Okay. So that's back to working. And there we go. There's the whole thing working again. Give me a minute to sit back and think about what we're doing next. Okay. There's still no new features here. It's just I've done a little bit of refactoring on the API. And the first thought that I have is I could spend more time doing refactoring on the API. There's a few other things that on my first pass I pointed out that I wanted to touch that I haven't done. So one more pass through on all the code to change that could be right now. But I don't think that there's a lot to gain from that right now. I think that that's pretty low priority, doesn't unblock anything. I think more interesting would be, let's start trying to move around where those layout parameters like centering are. Let's focus on that goal. So right now, we set the width and the layout stuff right here. So what I'm currently calling a layout parameter in the fancy system those things are just going to become paragraph, like paragraph layout stuff. All right, like that. And so then down here, where I set paragraphs, I take out the end paragraph error finder, and we want to set width. That can be set as just a size that'll get scaled later. Justify, and then align. Right? And so those can come live right here next to paragraph space. They'll work the same exact way. Okay, and we'll copy them forward as properties along with the paragraph space. So there we go. We can take paragraph details, push them down further. Let's go set the defaults. So paragraph width is going to default to, I think they were saying 1200. Paragraph justify is the default. I guess we probably want that to be a Boolean so we can turn it on and off. So like that. Otherwise, I can set it as a default to be on, but I don't have a spot to turn it back off. I could also say that if you set the align, then it's assumed you are overriding the justify, since you can't have align. Align is irrelevant whenever you have justify on, so I'll do it that both ways. Yeah, so the layout won't need to be told the parameters anymore. So that is the interesting change. You aren't being told your parameters. Instead, what used to be a parameter is now pulled out of the paragraph node. That's why we pulled these paragraph nodes out in the first place. It's not to change the way we structure the information we pass in for fun. It was because we want to be able to attach some paragraph information, like layout information, to some of the nodes. So now let's make that work. Let's see here. There's the W, justify, and the align. So down here where it's going param W, that is now paragraph width. So something I need to change is when I get the paragraph width, I should put that through apps size scale right away. Paragraph justify, paragraph width, paragraph width, paragraph align. You don't need to fill out layout parameters or pass them. So this can just look like this. Okay, so now what we've done is we've still got all the behavior exactly the way it was before, but we're achieving it through a different means where each paragraph actually has its own layout settings. So in theory, I should be able to go in there and change the layout settings on a couple of these things, and it should work. Let's take a look. So I want to set this paragraph to align centered. And I want to do the same thing on these paragraphs. Nice. There we go. Now we're showing off the new feature. So that's nice. And I think that's a good good idea for what to do first, because that gave me a very good look at how everything is working. It's got fresh in my head the weird quirks of the special rules that exist in the system, as I had to go and debug them and stuff. So I'm fully loaded in all the information that I need in order to actually think about this well. And I think the correct big next step is to undo some of the problems in the design that tripped me up while building this feature. Because some of those problems in the design are pretty nasty, and if I ever did another hierarchical data structure shift, it would be real painful. I'd be real hesitant to do it. I don't want to have to hold myself back from doing new features because I feel this threat of bugs that I have lingering in the design, right? So I think that's worth addressing, thinking about how it could be structured so that can't happen so easily. Some of these things are not that hard to imagine a different approach for. So layout is trickier, but shifting the position, it's just a matter of shifting the delta position on everything in the string. So like shift position takes in a layout, and we're just going to say it does this. If you have a position anywhere in this tree, you get the shift, and then we look at the children. So this would be like, right, you take the like layout node or something. Right? So I think that shouldn't break anything. Great. And so now the layout tree is just, you pass in the root of the layout tree and the whole thing, everything with a position gets shifted by the same amount. Rendering is close to being just as simple, but I might want a little bit of I think I want a little bit of separation between the main draw function and the recursive one, because something like that first line that I see there doesn't belong in the recursion. And so it might just be nice to plan on having that separation. Now, once I go in there, what can the rule be? Well, it's going to have to be something like this. We're going to grab the font from this. So the layout node is going to need to have a non-zero font in order for us to render it. Why don't we... Yeah, if I ask to use a font and I give you some nonsense like the size is 0 or the ID is irrelevant or invalid, you give me a nil font. Okay. So if the font, I'm going to explicitly avoid doing the extra work in this case. You know, this nil is set up so that you don't have to check it and it will not crash. But in this case, I want to explicitly, I intend for that to be a path that gets hit a lot so that I can have structuring hierarchical nodes in the string that don't actually have any font attached. And those, I don't want them to like do the work of like pretending to draw a rectangle in a string when we could very easily see that that's not going to happen. So the rectangle actually, after saying all that, I should also take a look at this though. The rectangle, yeah, so we're going to do this one by checking the color. If the color is not 0 on either part of the gradient, then we'll assume that it's worth the effort. If it's been cleared to 0, then not worth the effort. Then we take a look at the font, if the font is in good shape, and if there's actually a string on here at all. We can do this just to avoid accidentally rendering out fonts that we're not going to use. Then we drop the string, and these are actually doing the exact same rule for rendering themselves. The only difference was they were reusing the font from their parent. But if we just go ahead and drop into a recursive like pass over the children to end off, we would still get the same behavior, although through slightly less like locally optimized reasons, it really shouldn't matter. They should have the same font, and therefore they should grab the same slot from the cache their parent used. And there we go. Everything still looks the same. So those changes should in theory make it so that I could put extra nodes in here, like we could test this out like this. Let's say after I've done a layout, I want it to be like real annoying, and so I went in here and I was like, hey, actually I want a super layout and I want to attach the super layout. I want to attach the layout into the super layout like this, and then I'll return to you the super layout. So why? These are called layout node now. Which makes the lines longer annoyingly, but fine. I'm not quite sure why. It's probably something about this. Let me double check. Yes, that's correct. If I put the layout inside of another node, make sure I'm running the attach the right way around. Yeah. It's not like it's recursively applying the outer position into the inner position or anything like that. Oh, but because I'm... Right, so one thing I have to do is if I were to do this, the super layout does need to know about the layouts. Right, it has to contain the thing underneath it properly. So there we go. I can just like, I can do this and everything keeps working now. So adding new things to this hierarchy, here's with the original hierarchy, it works. I do this, and now I've put another node at the top of the tree, so everything is now shifted farther down in the tree, and everything's still working. We're still laying it out the same, we're still drawing it the same. Now the part where that doesn't magically work is here in the core layout loop engine stuff, like the thing that decides where to place stuff. This still has some ties to the assumptions of like paragraphs going underneath roots and string text going underneath paragraphs in the input side, but that might be less of a problem. All the bugs I had there were about the shifting of positions and the drawing. Oh, there was also the alives. The alives wouldn't work. So yeah, if I put the super layout in, then what should happen here is, yeah, the alives are dead. Let's go fix that. So when I make an alive, there it is. When I scan here for the alive IDs that match, I'm using a non-recursive scan. So the tricky thing here is I don't want to have to make like a recursive scan and pass this in as a function callback to recursively visit everything and then call back to this. Right? I want a local scan here, but we can actually do that. When we're dealing with trees a lot, it's always a good idea to sooner or later just drop in your own like stack helper, so you can make explicit stacks for walking the tree. And so what'll happen here is we'll have, do we have a scratch set up in this? Nope, that's fine. We just set one up. So we need a scratch now, so we can have a local stack. And then we need, right here we have our stack, which is going to start off empty, and our free stack, which is also going to start off empty. And then we're going to set stack equal to, push one of these on there. And it's going to point to the root layout node like that. And just thinking to myself for a moment. Yeah, we probably want to do this a little more strictly just to give us a good template, a good pattern. So we'll call this the stack top and the stack free. And then this will be the stack node like that. And we'll do SLL stack push stack top stack like that after we've created it. So there we go. And then we begin a loop like this. We go if the stack top is 0, then we're done. Otherwise, we take the stack off the stack top like this. we process the string that is attached to that particular node on the stack. String comes from the stack string like that. We could just do this like stack top string like that, actually. And then down here at the bottom, we run the pop. No, this doesn't work. We need to do, save this first, pop from the stack, process the string. Pop, stack, top, SLL. All right, so here we need the string stack, stack top, SLL stack push, stack free stack. So we just moved this node off the top of the stack onto our free chain, and then we process the string. And then, whether or not it was alive, we push children onto stack. And that goes like this. For the children, for the kids, we do it for the kids. We go like this for each child there. And then we need a new stack node. So one way to get a new stack node is like this. But we can also go look and see if there's one in the stack free first. So if stack does not equal 0, then we pop the stack free. Otherwise, we push another one onto the arena itself. And then we push that onto the stack top. And we set the string pointer inside that stack to the child. There we go. So eventually, this should churn through all of the children in the tree, applying this to the string of each one, and then the rest of this is the boilerplate for the tree walk. And unfortunately, I do have two places where that happens. So this is bumping up in priority, something I've already known I needed to do, which is to do accelerate the alive to fancy string. Mapping. So this is all for mapping the string to, or the alive to one or more fancy strings. That's all we're doing here, is we're figuring out which strings does this alive in particular, which strings does it deal with. And so we're anywhere where the strings alive ID matches the alive ID that we pulled off of the alive itself, they go together and we process them right here. What we don't have in here, or what we don't see here, is that it's like possibly more than one of them, right? So it's possible that there are multiple string like parts that are all attached here, and so they're all animating together or something, like it's a phrase that's animating. So we do process a list here, and if we just had an accelerator that did this and we were relying on the accelerator, then all this iterating through the whole tree boilerplate can go away. But in the time while we don't have that, I'm going to just duplicate it, and maybe that would be the right thing to focus on for today, is fixing that issue next, maybe. But there's a spot down here or up here. There's a spot around here somewhere where we have the alive system do, yep, here it is. And if your alive ID is a match, you do this. That's going to replace this section. Oh, it's going to replace this section. And that break will take us out of the tree walk because we only have an outside loop there. That's good. I do think we probably want to avoid having to do some of this. Since the machine that lets us do a tree walk is a little bit rough. And if we do this break here, we're ending up with stuff still in the stack. So I think we want to do an extra bit of logic here that says flush with stack, where we just go, if we got to the end of that without actually emptying the stack, then do the pop stack thing over and over again. Okay, so this isn't quite right for a couple of reasons. One, you can see like it's separating those out, which it didn't used to do the right thing, and now it's confused and doing it this way. I think I know why that is. It's not marking this one, which it should do, so that's also bad. Yeah, let's take a look. So I think it didn't used to actually be applying to the whole tree. It would only apply some of this logic to the root. So let's say, for instance, here we are looking at who has the mouse hit check. If we have, okay, yeah, we actually want to stop. Well, we do stop. We don't look at the children. Your live mouse hover gets set to true. Here we do want it to apply to the whole thing because we're... Oh, it's applying the substring. It's applying it to the substrings manually. That's part of the issue. Right, so we want to apply this to everything, but this only to the root of the no wrap, not to the whole thing. So when this happens here, what's happening is we have a phrase with multiple words in it, and an extra layer of hierarchy is created for them. So this is actually being applied twice, once here and then once again when the child makes its way through. So we want to let that just always get applied like this. But then we also want to say this should not get applied at both layers, right? This was the one. So we want something like this, no wrap, right? When we go to make the block here, let's say that this is like layout block is an option here. If this string is a layout block or layout box, something like that. And then when we have a no wrap up here, and we create that word container is the layout box. Or we could make this like sub string, and then by default, the substring is false, but in this particular case, the substring becomes true. And then these things get their substring property from that. It's a little bit, a little bit not ideal, but something like this. Okay, so that fixes the fact that these were extra highlighted. The other issue is why isn't this getting discovered? Right, that's kind of weird. Yeah, so it seems like we're not finding it in this moment. So we have a loop that goes over all of the IDs. And it seems like that only works for ID 1 somehow. Why could that be? I could just look at this in the debugger. Probably what I should do. Yeah, so here we go. Here's our ID. Let's see what happens when ID equals something other than 1. So, okay, right now ID equals 1. We expect that's just going to find its match and be good. Okay, ID 2 exists. We do a walk over the tree. Nothing happened. Stack top. Oh, there's the mistake. This is the part of the tree walk. Not a part of the initialization of the stack machine for the tree walk. There we go. Very good. Okay. So still more to do there. Space placement controls, put paragraphs inside their own nodes. We did that. Width and text justification per paragraph. We've done that. So we're kind of looking at maybe wanting to solve this problem next in order to clean up the code around how we iterate the nodes generically. As I'm trying to avoid these issues of having like a fixed rigid hierarchy shape that needs to be followed, and we're getting closer. There's still this problem with the no wraps, and I think that a more elegant solution to the no wraps, first of all, might not be worth it or possible, but if it is, it's probably tied to the dealing with this situation where there's the extra spaces that we don't want sometimes between punctuation and words because they're styled differently. So the reason I think those are related is we would have to solve both of them simultaneously, and they are both more subtle, difficult parts of the sort of line wrapping logic and the spacing logic and stuff. So the solutions to those would probably look something like having a buffer of text and laying it out and having the layout analysis be somewhat independent from the style. It can't be independent from the style completely because it has to read off of font data, like how big the font is and how big the characters are in the font and stuff to figure out wrapping. But it also doesn't need to be sensitive to like, oh, is this colored this way or is it alive or anything like that. So we want to get to a point where we can mark a range of text as colored without splitting it up into separate nodes for layout purposes. And vice versa, we want to get to a point where we can mark a range of text as not being allowed to be split up by line wrapping without having to adjust that piece of text in the hierarchy differently, right? If we were to try to solve one of them and not the other, it'd be a problem. So we'd have to understand them as parts of the same bigger solution at some point. And that might make this, the non-elegance of the no wrap solution go away. But I think the bigger non-elegance for now would be solved by doing this. And then I think it's pretty important that I get a chance to do scrolling so that I can like get past some limitations there and get to things like the navigation, hover, and those other things. So like I kind of want to just keep cranking through these things, leave the inelegance in there for the hierarchy a little bit, but I'll put in a to-do up here next to space placement controls. No wrap hierarchy. Solve or supply no wrap without the hierarchy hack technique. Something like that. Not quite sure if that's the right way to, like, maybe it's not something like that is what I mean to say. This one I want to save for later. Flowing around blocks would be like if I wanted to put a sprite on the screen, you know, if I'm playing and I want to put a big sprite right here and then I want the text to flow around it. And I don't want to go down that road right now, but it could be good to have something like that someday. Transition. Yeah, that's something I was thinking about before. I don't think that that's particularly connected to the rest of this. It's more like what kinds of transitions could I... There might be a need for transition if I'm going to do like tabs. Like if I was going to have pages that I could like go from page to page in a page turn kind of feeling structure. There might want to be like smooth scrolling kinds of transitions, but like transitions between totally separate spaces, maybe not. Although I'm also talking about like, hey, I want to be able to pull up the character sheet and push the story stuff off to the side and then pull the story stuff back in and push off this character sheet to a mini mode. And the transitions there might be a thing already, but still, I don't know. There's a little bit of a disconnect. Like whatever features you add to handle the transition are almost a separate system that don't connect in with the issues, and they don't also unblock me as much as some of these other things. So let's build this accelerator and then hopefully get at least scrolling in for today. Although yeah, I mean, maybe what I could do is I could take a lunch break and we could stream again a little later in the day, maybe in like 30 or 40 minutes, because I'm feeling like a lunch, a little food in my stomach would help with the next steps. But I do want to get a lot more done than this, and I'm kind of feeling like a big work day today. So let's do a lunch break. I'm going to sign off for now. I'll be back in 30 to 40 minutes, and we'll try to crank through these to-dos for the afternoon. All right? Thanks to everyone who's been hanging out, and I'll see you guys again in a little bit. Bye-bye.